Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Amina, and today we are discussing neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are a chemical messenger that transmit a message from a neuron to a target cell, and this happens in your brain. Now, if you know anything about neurotransmitters, then you know how malleable they are, and you know how much control we actually do have over them. And if you don't know anything about them, then you might think this is quite complicated and beyond you, but actually neurotransmitters control quite a lot of our daily lives. So control things like movement, can control things like hunger, and there's so many aspects of that which dictate how we spend our day and kind of what occurs mentally with us throughout the day. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how you can affect and change those neurotransmitter balances in order to enhance learning, in order to enhance mood, and also in order to enhance your engagement, especially if you're doing a task that requires something like motivation. You definitely need to think about how active your brain are and whether you're transmitting the right signals at the right time. Now, there are 5 key neurotransmitters that I'm going to be discussing in today's video. There are others as well that are implicated in learning and education, but there are these 5 key ones that I'm going to be mentioning today that you can try to modify in order to help advance your learning. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post every Wednesday and every Sunday. To see more from me, I would absolutely love it if you could press the subscribe button, and let's keep on watching to find out how to change your mood, your learning, and how to up that productivity. So the first one is one that you've probably definitely heard, and it's dopamine. Now, dopamine is a really interesting neurotransmitter as it plays a role in the feeling of pleasure, and it's really important in sort of thinking, planning, and how we find things interesting. And now you can imagine how important this is when you're learning and when you're trying to kind of stay focused and adaptable. You want to make sure that you are enjoying and finding pleasure in the things that you are learning and the things that you are reading. Interestingly, dopamine is also implicated in Parkinson's disease. You might be thinking, how does Parkinson's disease link into learning? But actually, there's a type of neuron that kind of degenerates over time and slowly decreases the production of dopamine. And dopamine is actually also implicated in movement as well, which is why someone that has Parkinson's disease starts to show signs of like tremor and sluggish movement as well. But with regards to learning, there are a few kind of papers that have been published recently that show that dopamine works in 2 ways. In one way, it works to enhance motivation. On the other hand, it works to enhance learning. So you obviously need to kind of first be motivated and kind of overcome that barrier of wanting to learn to then actually learning from the information that you're taking in. So it works in 2 ways, and it works using sort of 2 different fluctuations of dopamine release. One is slow dopamine release and one is fast dopamine release. And actually, dopamine controls reward motivated behavior. So it's behavior that you know at the end of this particular task and action, you will get a reward. So there's loads of studies on this kind of behavior where they, put mice into some sort of crash course and they need to get to the end in order to get the food or whatever it is. And so over time, but actually very quickly, these animals learn to become more efficient at getting to the end of that task and succeeding in order to achieve that reward. And when measured, their dopamine levels are really high during this time. And this positive reinforcement, you can train yourself for this positive reinforcement. So that means that you know that every single time that you do this task, you will be rewarded with something. And so over time, that then builds up motivation, because you can now imagine that if you know that every time you, let's say, revise, you end up with a top grade, then you will now in the future be motivated to revise because you know what happens at the end of that. So it's a really interesting cycle of motivation and learning, because without one, you really can't have the other. So how can you activate this? Well, think about positive reinforcement. Think about ways in which you can quickly sort of get rewarded for what you've done. Now, I'm thinking beyond like having a chocolate at the end in between every single page. Like, let's think beyond that. Let's think bigger picture. You want to try to break up your work or your task into small, achievable tasks that mean that after, let's say, 20 minutes of doing something, you've achieved something on your to-do list. One thing that works quite well here is active recall. So you may have like kind of flashcards, or you may have exam papers that you're completing. And so every sort of couple of minutes, you are getting the answer right and you're achieving success. And at the end of it, you'll have good grade for that practice paper that you've done. So that could be like really short short, sweet tasks as opposed to sort of copying or just writing down information for like 2-3 hours. Pomodoro technique is also really good here. So it's like short bursts of 20 minutes, and in that 20 minutes you want to do this thing, and at the end of it you would have completed that thing, and so you'd feel like you've completed something successfully. And even just more long term, you know, looking at sort of your input and the output. So just trying to be really honest with yourself and saying, look, when I actually do something, when I actually get stuff done, it ends up being really productive, and I end up getting the grade that I want, I end up getting the result that I want, I end up completing in the way that I want and the outcome that I want. And so through that kind of, I guess, through that kind of cycle, you're able to again stimulate yourself and stimulate that reward pathway, which you so desperately need to sort of activate and learn to keep on. The second neurotransmitter is serotonin. Again, this may be one that you've heard before. This is one that impacts and affects mood, but it's also implicated in the control of other things such as sleep. So you can kind of already maybe put those two things together. So you can already imagine like bad sleep will end up having a low mood, will end up sort of not being as productive, not as motivated, very sluggish. So that cycle already exists just from those two components. But thinking in a bit more depth about the research, they've shown that serotonin actually impacts the speed of learning. So it's not just the learning itself, but it's how quickly you're picking up information. And there was a study done, I believe in 2018, and they activated serotonin neurons using artificial light in mice, and they recorded that mice were more kind of adaptable and reacted quicker to learning a new skill or whatever was tested with than mice that did not have serotonin activated neurons. And there was also, interestingly, the use of long-term memory. So they showed that mice were able to look back and kind of recall information that they had or skills that they had picked up from a previous task and use that more quickly and more adaptively in the current task in comparison to mice that did not have serotonin activated. And so it's quite interesting when you think about learning, because again, we want to think about firstly learning quickly. We don't want to spend all day learning one thing, considering how much we need to learn, but also you want to make sure that you're not just learning today, forgetting tomorrow. You want to make sure that you are recalling information. You want to make sure that you're using your long-term memory as much as possible. So how can we activate serotonin when learning? Firstly, I mean, you can probably guess what I was going to say. Try to get enough sleep. Not enough sleep, mood is low, everything else is just down the drain. So you want to make sure that you are as actively trying to sleep as early as possible and trying to get the best quality sleep. It's one thing to get into bed early, but it's another thing to actually get good quality sleep. So that means that you might want to have a shower before bed, have a nice little soak in the bath before bed, go for a jog before bed to really tire yourself out. But what you want to do is get good quality sleep, which means you're waking up fresh and in a positive mood. But more specifically, you want to try to increase your diet of foods that include tryptophan. So tryptophan converts to serotonin in the brain. So you can't ingest serotonin. You can ingest tryptophan in foods such as like bananas, salmon, eggs, turkey, and cheese. These are some foods that are quite high in tryptophan. So by consuming more of those type of foods, you are more likely to have a higher store of tryptophan, which means that you can convert to serotonin in the brain. And so you've got obviously a good diet there also helps. And lastly, try to keep the light on when studying, or just the light on during the day when you want to be motivated. So again, that means that you're activating those light enabled neurons, and again means that your mood is high. Another thing that you could do is kind of go for a walk outside, get some vitamin D. It's sunny here in London now, so definitely going outside and kind of getting that light air and not being sort of trapped in your small space. The third is oxytocin, which is the love hormone, or known as a love hormone. It's a hormone that is released when you feel pleasure, but actually it's also involved in social interaction. So it's to do with relationships and to do with sort of social bonding, and research shows that when individuals are in a social interaction and they kind of forming relationships, this is a neurotransmitter that is released and is involved in that process. But it's important to note that oxytocin is involved in both positive and also negative social behavior. So positive such as like maternal behavior, forming like positive relationships and like trust and altruism, but it's also involved in like the negative things, so things like being aggressive or anxiety as well. So therefore it's important to kind of try to balance this neurotransmitter. So you don't want too much of it, but you also don't want too little of it. So it's important that you're kind of kept at a steady state. And actually a few universities I know that Kings did this when I was there, and also recently. They would have like a animal petting kind of station during exam season. So students can kind of come to a space, pet some like animals, and then go to their exams. I know it sounds really weird, but it does release oxytocin. It releases the kind of happy hormone, releases the love hormone, and has a positive impact on exam performance. So think about ways in which you can maybe boost that mood and that positivity and things that can make you happy. So how can you activate oxytocin? I would just mention, try to find ways to tap into that happy hormone using kind of social interactions. So that could be meeting up with someone close to you that you know will make you laugh, that you love, maybe going to a farm, seeing like little animals, seeing little pets, just doing things that are kind of happy. This is a more sort of social interaction hormone, so it is important to try to find ways of doing things around others, not just by yourself. Another way that you could activate it is like through a mentoring program. So something like you can have a phone call with an older person or a lonely person or someone who needs a bit more support or someone to talk to. Again, that's another way of sort of that altruistic social interaction. That's an outcome that can be released as well from oxytocin. The fourth is endorphins. You've definitely heard of this one. Endorphins are feel-good chemicals, and they usually peak when you're in a flow. So you're in the flow of something. So that could be if you're at the gym and you're really kind of getting at it and you're, doing what you've always wanted to do. You woke up early in the morning and you're in that flow. It can be when you're studying and you've hit that 1 hour mark and you're doing really well. So it's when you're in the flow of something, that's when you release endorphins. And they shield the body from pain. So when you're in a situation and you're completely kind of engrossed by it, you actually don't feel pain. So there's sometimes when, even like giving birth, for example, there's so much pain going on. If you measure the pain scale, it's off the charts. But in that particular moment, you actually don't feel it because you're so engrossed in that moment that the pain of whatever's happening is kind of shielded by this neurotransmitter, and it's only afterwards that you might feel the pain if it's long lasting. So endorphins are also known to foster concentration, so they're also known to be important for solitary work. So whereas the previous neurotransmitter we talked about was kind of more useful for social interactions, this neurotransmitter is more useful for sort of one-to-one, like by yourself, independent tasks. So how can you activate endorphins? Well, try to find a space that works for you. Try to find something that works, a space that works where you can sit down, just get on with a task quietly. If that's in the library, if that's in the park, if that's in a coffee shop where you've got like the buzz of sounds around you, somewhere that you can kind of just get into it and you know that you can get like a couple of hours of solid work and undisturbed work done. And also just setting sort of small achievable goals as well. And I think this is quite similar to the first point that we talked about. It's just setting achievable goals that are short. I mean that you're kind of keep on kind of bouncing off of them and feeling that success. And the fifth and the last neurotransmitter is cortisol. Now cortisol is known as the stress hormone, and it's the transmitter that's released when you are in panic and when you are stressed. And it tries to find a way to kind of escape a potentially dangerous situation. It also works to control your mood and to control things like fear. Now, when I say dangerous situation, we're not talking about like someone trying to shielding a massive knife. Even just things like you're studying and you feel like you're going to fail. That in itself is something that your brain can perceive as dangerous or something that's like quite stressful. And so cortisol can be released in those situations as well. So it's important to try to always regulate your mood and always try to think positively about everything that you're doing, especially when studying and learning. And so you don't want too much cortisol circulating in your brain. Research has shown that too much cortisol is quite detrimental to mood and also detrimental to learning and memory. So if you are stressed out and you're trying to read something and learn something, you won't retain that information. So it's really key to, like I said, try to keep cortisol down by being as sort of calm as possible. Well, how can you like regulate cortisol? One thing that you could do is try to always balance learning with relaxation. Try not to do like 5-hour stretches. I know we see on YouTube like 8-hour stretches of work. That might work for some, but I think for the most part, for most of us, it's important to have like shorter breaks and short study times. Yes, it's completely okay to work for 8 hours of the day. That's okay. But to start at one time and to finish 8 hours later, you're not working at your most productive for all 8 hours. So try to alternate positive with negative. Try to alternate positive working with relaxation. So it just means that you're constantly sort of back and forth and you're constantly just reassuring yourself that everything's okay, you're relaxed now, and we're back to that, like reset that mindset. You also want to set sort of smaller tasks that have defined deadlines. And one thing that I always speak to my mentees and my students about when I talk to them about their assignments is that yes, you have a massive deadline at the end of whatever that term, but that's just a deadline for when you need to return the work, right? You should set your own deadlines in between, and what that helps is it really helps manage your time, it helps manage your pace as well. It means that you're not going to get like stressed out right at the end and you'll be in that panic, that high stress state. So setting small deadlines. So this week, at the end of this week, you want to have done all the research and collected all your literature for your paper. After a week, you want to have read everything and you want to have grouped up all that data and summarized everything. And then after a week, so and so. And so you've broken up your time really well, as opposed to just looking at the end date and trying to work towards that ambiguously without sort of any direction. So I hope that this video helped you thinking about different neurotransmitters, and these all work in our brains to, you know, push us towards a trajectory of maybe pro-learning, anti-learning, focus. It really impacts every part of our mood and every part of what we do in our everyday life. So it is key for us to try to modify and try to think about, why am I a bit off today? What's going on? Okay, I'm a bit stressed. Right, let me try to calm things down. But anyway, if you want to see more like this from me, then don't forget to press the subscribe button and leave me a comment and let me know if you've tried any of these techniques and if you knew what it was doing to you at the time. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.